July 2, 1955 began like any other day at New York's Idlewild Airport, now known as JFK. Among the hustle and bustle of travelers, Flight 914 prepared for takeoff, its destination, Miami, Florida. On board were 57 passengers and a crew of 4. The plane taxied down the runway and lifted into the clear blue sky. Then, without warning, it vanished. Flight 914 had disappeared without a trace. The disappearance sent shockwaves through the aviation world. How could a modern aircraft simply vanish? Families clung to hope, praying for the safe return of their loved ones. The mystery deepened with each passing day. The disappearance of Flight 914 became a haunting reminder of the unknown. It was a mystery that would remain unsolved for decades. Following the baffling disappearance, a massive search and rescue operation was launched. The Coast Guard scoured the Atlantic Ocean for any sign of wreckage. Planes meticulously scanned the projected flight path, hoping for a miracle. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Despite their tireless efforts, no trace of Flight 914 was ever found. The official investigation concluded that the aircraft had crashed at sea, likely due to some catastrophic failure. However, the lack of evidence fueled speculation. Theories ranged from pilot error to equipment malfunction, hijacking, and even alien abduction. Yet none of these theories could definitively explain the complete disappearance of the plane and everyone on board. The mystery of Flight 914 refused to die, relegated to the realm of unsolved mysteries. Fast forward to May 21, 1992. It was a day like any other at Caracas International Airport in Venezuela, bustling with the usual activity of flights taking off and landing, passengers hurrying to their gates, and the constant hum of airport operations. The control tower at Caracas International Airport in Venezuela picked up a strange blip on their radar. At first, it seemed like a minor anomaly, something that could be easily explained away. But as the seconds ticked by, the blip remained, growing more prominent and demanding attention. It was an unidentified aircraft approaching from an unexpected direction. The controllers exchanged puzzled glances, their training kicking in as they prepared to handle the unknown. The aircraft's trajectory was unusual, not following any known flight path. Air traffic controllers tried to make contact, but their calls went unanswered. The silence on the other end of the radio was unnerving. They tried again, their voices growing more urgent with each attempt. Still, there was no response, only the static of an empty frequency. The blip grew larger on the radar screen, and soon an aircraft emerged from the clouds. It was a sight that left the controllers momentarily speechless. The plane seemed to materialize out of thin air, its presence both unexpected and inexplicable. It was a Douglas DC-4, a model that hadn't been in service for decades. The sight of such an old aircraft in the modern skies was bewildering. The DC-4 was a relic from a bygone era, a piece of aviation history that had no place in the present day. The plane looked eerily out of place, almost like a ghost from the past. Its weathered exterior and vintage design stood in stark contrast to the sleek modern aircraft that typically filled the skies. It was as if time had folded in on itself, bringing the past into the present.
The vintage aircraft circled the airport twice before finally making contact with the tower. The controllers watched in a mix of awe and apprehension as the plane maneuvered with surprising agility. It was clear that whoever was piloting the aircraft was experienced, but the question remained, who were they? The pilot's voice was filled with confusion. "Where are we?" he asked, his voice crackling over the radio. The question hung in the air, adding to the growing sense of mystery. How could a pilot not know their location?
The air traffic controller, taken aback, responded, trying to maintain professionalism despite the bizarre situation. The controller's mind raced with possibilities, each more improbable than the last.
"This is Caracas International Airport, sir. Where are you headed?" The controller's voice was steady, but there was an undercurrent of tension. The entire control room was on edge, waiting for the pilot's response.
The pilot's reply sent chills down the spines of everyone who heard it. The room fell silent, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone present. It was a response that defied logic and explanation.
"Miami," he said, his voice a mix of confusion and fear. The word hung in the air, a stark reminder of the impossibility of the situation. How could a plane from the past, a plane that should no longer exist, be headed to Miami? The mystery deepened, leaving more questions than answers.
The air traffic controllers were stunned. The pilot claimed to be flying Flight 914 from New York to Miami. He sounded genuinely disoriented, as if he had just woken up from a deep sleep. The date he gave was July 2nd, 1955. It was unbelievable. Could this be the long-lost Flight 914, reappearing after 37 years?
Flight 914, we show you are significantly off course. You are approaching Caracas, Venezuela.
There was a moment of silence on the other end of the radio, followed by the sound of muffled voices.
Caracas, that's impossible. We're on a short hop to Miami. Our flight plan...
His voice trailed off. The situation was surreal. The control tower had a potential aviation ghost on their hands. While the air traffic controllers tried to make sense of the situation, the pilot of Flight 914 became increasingly agitated. The confusion in the control room was palpable, with controllers exchanging bewildered glances and hurriedly flipping through manuals, trying to find any protocol for such an unprecedented event. He spoke of being behind schedule, of his passengers growing impatient. The passengers, visible through the small windows, were a mix of anxiety and frustration, some peering out, trying to understand the delay, while others whispered among themselves, their faces etched with concern. The controllers tried to calm him down, urging him to land the plane. They reassured him that everything would be sorted out once he was safely on the ground. The radio crackled with their attempts to soothe the pilot, their voices steady but tinged with urgency. They explained that it was 1992, not 1955. The calendar on the wall, with its bold numbers, seemed to mock the surreal situation. The clock ticked away, each second heightening the tension in the room. However, the pilot seemed unable or unwilling to comprehend this information. His face, a mask of disbelief, reflected the impossibility of the situation. He shook his head, as if trying to shake off a bad dream, his hands gripping the controls tightly. He insisted on continuing his flight to Miami. The landscape below, a patchwork of fields and towns, seemed to blur as the plane maintained its course, the pilot's determination unwavering despite the bizarre circumstances.
I have to go. Thank you for your assistance, Caracas Tower. His voice, though calm, carried a note of finality, as if he had made peace with his decision. The close-up of his face revealed a man resolute, yet haunted by the unknown.
Before anyone could react, Flight 914 began to taxi down the runway. The engines roared to life, and the plane moved with a purpose, as if driven by an unseen force. The ground crew watched in stunned silence, unable to comprehend the unfolding events. The control tower watched in disbelief as the vintage aircraft took off once more, disappearing into the clouds just as quickly as it had arrived. The radar screens, usually so reliable, showed nothing but static, as if the plane had never existed. The plane and the mystery it carried was gone. The sky, now empty, seemed to hold its breath, the runway deserted and eerily quiet. The controllers, left with more questions than answers, could only stare at the empty horizon, wondering if they had just witnessed a ghostly departure. The events at Caracas International Airport left everyone baffled. It was a typical day at the bustling airport, with planes taking off and landing, passengers hurrying to their gates, and the usual hum of activity. But then, something extraordinary happened that would leave an indelible mark on aviation history. Had Flight 914 truly reappeared after all these years? The plane, a vintage model from the 1950s, seemed to have emerged from a time warp, its instruments and design a stark contrast to the modern aircraft surrounding it. If so, where had it been? The sky was clear, yet the plane seemed to have flown through a storm of time, emerging decades later without any logical explanation. The mysterious fog that surrounded its arrival only added to the enigma. The story quickly spread, captivating the public's imagination. Newspapers and media outlets around the world picked up the story, each adding their own theories and speculations. Was it a government cover-up, a scientific anomaly, or perhaps something even more inexplicable? People were intrigued by the idea of a plane lost in time, suddenly returning with its passengers and crew, seemingly untouched by the passage of years. The interior of the plane, with its vintage seats and decor, was like a time capsule, preserving a moment from the past. The mystery deepened with the alleged discovery of a discarded calendar from the plane. This calendar, weathered and worn, was a tangible link to the past, raising more questions than it answered. The calendar reportedly found on the runway was dated July 1955. This date was significant, as it matched the time when Flight 914 had originally disappeared. How could such an artifact remain intact for so long? Adding to the intrigue were the stories about the passengers. These individuals, dressed in clothing from the 1950s, seemed out of place in the modern world. Their bewildered expressions and confusion only heightened the sense of mystery. According to some accounts, the passengers and crew were briefly interviewed before being whisked away by authorities. These interviews, conducted with vintage equipment, were shrouded in secrecy, leaving the public to wonder what was being hidden. They reportedly expressed confusion and disorientation, unable to explain their whereabouts for the past 37 years. Their stories were fragmented, filled with gaps and inconsistencies, as if they had been in a dreamlike state. Their identification documents, while appearing authentic, were from the 1950s. These documents, meticulously preserved, were another piece of the puzzle, suggesting that the passengers had indeed come from another time. The mystery of Flight 914 and its passengers remained an enigma, a puzzle that seemed impossible to solve. As the sun set on the runway, casting long shadows, the questions lingered. Where had the plane been? How had it returned? And most importantly, what did this mean for our understanding of time and reality? The story of Flight 914 continues to captivate and mystify, a testament to the enduring allure of the unknown.